Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our virtual Lunch and Learn today. I'm Kristin Kirkwood, the Executive Director of the Harford Land Trust. We're going to keep this definitely under the hour, but a couple of housekeeping items before we get into the program for today. We are being recorded, and this session will be up on Harford Land Trust YouTube account after the session today. We do have our two team members, Jackie Kane and Nina Depkin, who are monitoring the chat. So please feel free to put any questions throughout the program in the chat function, and there'll be plenty of time at the end for us to go ahead and answer questions. Just for ease of running this session, we ask that you do keep yourself muted with your video off. If there's time at the end for people to actually talk instead of just typing in, we will let you know. But for now, we'll just have the presenters using their video and their audio. So this Lunch and Learn is about the transaction to protect and expand Stony demonstration forest in the Cresswell area. I'm delighted to have a few wonderful presenters joining me today, so we'll get right into the program. So as I said, I'm Kristin Kirkwood, the Executive Director of the Harford Land Trust. For those of you on the call that don't know the Land Trust, we are Harford County's only county-wide nonprofit land conservation organization. We're about 30 years old, and we preserve land all throughout the county. We do lots of different sorts of transactions, but this one by far that we're going to talk about today is our largest transaction in terms of acreage. I'm delighted to have with me three other presenters today. The first is Bill Crouch, the Maryland Director of the Conservation Fund. He's been in that role for over 16 years. And the Conservation Fund is a national nonprofit dedicated to protecting the US's land and water. Bill oversees all real estate transactions in the state of Maryland, and he has a legal and financial background. Next, we have Dave Webb. He is a Harford County naturalist. He recently retired from a career as an engineer at Aberdeen Proving Ground. He has extensive knowledge of birds and insects, and he's a contributing editor to Maryland's Biodiversity Project. He's also currently covering some atlas blocks for the Harford County Breeding Bird Atlas. And you may know him as we featured him recently in one of our publications as your resident mother. What I mean by that is that Dave spends a lot of his warm summer evenings out cataloging nocturnal insects in the county. And then Rob Felt. Rob is the regional forester for Maryland's Central Region. He's been with the Maryland Forest Service for over 16 years. And in that role, he covers Harford County, Baltimore counties, Carroll, Howard, and Montgomery County as well. But for Harford County, the base is out of the Madonna Ranger Station. So Rob and his team are the managers of Stony Demonstration Forest. So I'm going to start off with a short video. This is about 60 seconds, and this is one that we created right after the protection of this unique property. So we're going to jump back to the aerial map of this property. So if you zoomed out even further, you would notice that this is sort of a green spot in what is otherwise a quite developed area. You'll see 95 right to the south there. And if anyone's familiar with driving that stretch, you'll notice the Maryland House Travel Plaza right there. So that long stretch on your northern side of 95 is this newer section of Stony Demonstration Forest. The one that has the actual title, Stony Demonstration State Forest, on it, that is the older section of the forest. That older section is 318 acres, and it is now known as the James Run Tract, as James Run, a waterway, it sort of borders it on the western side. That was gifted to the state in 1981. While it's not totally contiguous with the new section known as the Grays Run Tract, they are located very close by. So they're on Nova Scotia Road, as well as Tower Road, and then Carson's Run Road. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, the Maryland Forest Service managed the Grays Run Tract to demonstrate numerous silvicultural techniques Rob will tell us about later. There is a small loop trail that's accessible from Nova Scotia Road that leads visitors past numerous markers corresponding to those past management practices. Both of these sections are part of the once extensive timberlands owned by Sidney Peverly. The Peverly family acquired a lot of this land in the 1920s. You'll notice on the newer section, there is a big gray spot there. That section was quarried for crushed stone from 1958 to 1972, and the area is now used for asphalt manufacturing, and it does remain under separate ownership from the state forest. Well after the construction of I-95, Victor Posner purchased the newer section, which we're calling the Grays Run Tract, he added it to his vast real estate holdings for prospective development. Posner, who was originally from Baltimore, his self-reported motto was, "I buy by the mile and sell by the inch," and he developed more than 1,000 acres in Harford County. But following his death in 2002, the property became managed by Brenda Nestor, one of Posner's business associates, who also intended to develop the property. But the Grays Run Tract really does provide us with innumerable ecological benefits, including the unbroken woodland habitat, stormwater absorption, filtration, and carbon storage. So even though it was slated for development, those of us who work to preserve land and water in Harford County always saw this on a map and just sort of scratched our heads and wondered, well, what if? So we had on the western side, this big smiley face. This was the property that was protected and under state forest ownership and management since 1981. But then we had this newer section with our big red angry face here, because it was really considered off limits for conservation. Numerous foresters were slating this for development, and also the value of the property was considered so high that it was really, you know, when I first started this job, we were told, don't waste your time, look elsewhere, put your resources into properties that are more likely to be preserved. But again, we knew that this was important as a connector piece. As Grays Run feeds into Cranberry Run, which feeds into the Bush River, and of course then to the bay. We also knew that this property backed right up to an important historic site, the Bush Forest Chapel, which was constructed in 1769 and is the oldest Methodist meeting house in Harford County and the second oldest in Maryland and the third oldest in America. We thought, well, what if? And then in 2018, the LLC that owned the Grays Run Tract went bankrupt. So that started the wheels in motion of a very unique partnership. And I'll now ask Bill Crouch to go ahead and put his video on and unmute himself and say hello, because this is where Bill comes in. So Bill was part of the team. So Bill, please go ahead and say hello, and then we'll introduce the team.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Crouch. I'm with the Conservation Fund. I'm looking at the slide to figure out which character I am, and I got it. Thank you very, very much, Kristin. And this project really started several years ago. I'm the Maryland Director for the Conservation Fund, and we are a national 501c3 nonprofit. I cover the entire state of Maryland, and we work closely with primarily the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to protect land. And the Hollywood One tract was by far, in my 16 plus years, actually probably in my entire career, the most complex and challenging project that I've ever worked on. And I will say this unequivocally, that without the assistance of Kristin and the Hartford Land Trust, this project would have never happened. Each of our organizations brought critical skills to the table. And I will say that when I first started pursuing this project, learning that it was in bankruptcy, I think Kristin had found out about it, and we kind of were, we had a conversation with each other, and we had never met before. And we turned that conversation into a real teamwork, Kristin's local connections, local knowledge of the players, or something that I just didn't have. And her ability to navigate the local support in Harford County was absolutely critical. And like I said, it was that local support that we never, this project would have never happened if we didn't have that strong partnership with the Harford Land Trust and Kristin. And I'm happy to report that after this transaction, Kristin and I are still great friends, and we look forward to doing the next one.
Thanks so much, Bill. Well, as Bill said, this whole project was built on partnerships, and it was an absolute team effort. And I feel exactly as Bill said, that none of us would have been able to do this alone. And certainly this was not something the Harford Land Trust could have tackled on our own as well. So in addition to the Conservation Fund, Bill mentioned the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, which was certainly front and center on this effort. And then also we have here Aberdeen Proving Ground. And so many of you know that Harford Land Trust has a longstanding relationship with Aberdeen Proving Ground to mobilize funds to protect land in the southern part of Harford County. Some of you who know me personally also know I have kids. So this image here is of some Candyland characters, and I'll explain why we've got that. One important reason is, as Bill said, this was so complex and tumultuous that if we don't keep this lighthearted, Bill and I might have a big cry session, because this really was an effort that took a lot of emotional energy, let alone time and resources. So we're going to keep it lighthearted today with Candyland. So let's jump into what happened. So here we have, this is our long and winding road with many unforeseen pitfalls and many unforeseen characters that we're going to jump in the way. Of course, we're all trying to get to the end, King Candy, which is the preservation of this property. So what happened first? So I talked a little bit about this quarry. Here's a picture there of what that looks like. And that was an unusual situation, having a quarry in the middle of a property that we wanted to protect. But it was further complicated because we quickly discovered that a section of this quarry was actually on the forest property. There was a handshake agreement many, many decades ago to allow that piece of property to be used, but that was never formalized through certain zoning arrangements, through a movement of the lot lines. And so Bill and I remember some hard conversations, and we both just agreed neither of our organizations want any business owning a quarry. So what are we going to do about this? So the first thing we had to work to do was to support an arrangement by which the lines of these parcels would be changed so that the quarry was no longer part of the forest. And that was not trivial. So that took us some time at the start. Then it was appraisal time. So how much does this property really cost? And how much are we going to pay for it? So an appraisal is really important when you're looking at public funding sources. Then I have an S here, appraisals, plural, because we didn't just get one or two, we got 4 appraisals. And that was necessary because on such a complicated property, you oftentimes need numerous appraisals to triangulate those values. Luckily, a few of them did cluster together, and that helped us and the Maryland Department of Natural Resources and the Army arrive at what was a value that was reasonable to pay using taxpayer dollars. Bill, I don't know if you want to chime in. Have you ever done 4 appraisals on another property?
It's pretty rare. And if you'll recall, Kristin, that there was a piece of the property that was on the other side of I-95.
Yes.
And yeah, we've it's not uncommon to do multiple appraisals, but I think 4 is my personal best.
Yeah, I hope never to repeat that. That takes a lot of time and a lot of money, a lot of experts to put their heads into that to get us a number. And then there was an interesting time when Bill had to actually fly to Miami because the LLC that went bankrupt that owned this property was actually registered in Miami. And so what happens when an organization goes bankrupt, or any creditors, which in this case there were, that the creditors want their money back. And so this went through a bankruptcy auction proceeding, which Bill and I learned all about, and I hope never to repeat. So maybe he can comment quickly on that experience of going to Miami.
So this was in early 2020, and if another week had passed, I don't think I would have been able to go because of COVID. This is called a stalking horse auction process. It would take an hour to get through the mechanics of that, but you can just imagine how much effort Kristin and I had to put into really marrying up the Department of Natural Resources acquisition process with a federal bankruptcy proceeding. That was kind of the key trick in this transaction. And one of the things that being one of the smarter things that we did is early on in the process, we brought in a special consultant relative to bankruptcy who turned out to be critical in helping us navigate and ultimately become successful after a couple swings at the plate, ultimately become successful in acquiring the property.
Thanks, Bill. And then it was bean counting time. So when we thought we had a chance at this, there was a lot of effort of trying to figure out where all the money was going to come from. We had arrived at a price that was a bit more than $4 million, which is certainly a lot of money. And so we were counting, bringing money from different sources. Anyone that has tried to secure money from state and federal processes know that there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of checks and balances to the process, and this was definitely not trivial. And then once we thought we had enough money, there was a bit of wrangling over the contract. So in a bankruptcy proceeding, in this case, a court actually awards the contract of sale for this piece of property. And that's really glossing over a lot of mechanics behind the scenes. I remember one time when I was sent what's called the court docket from these bankruptcy proceedings, and it totaled well over 200 pages of different things that had happened during those proceedings. So there was a lot of rules over who got the contract and why. And of course, just remember that in this case, there was numerous creditors, those were banks, who wanted to get their money back from this transaction. And so they were in many ways driving the ship. And so the creditors were most interested in getting the most money as fast as they could. So many of you that might have bought residential property are familiar with mortgages, for example. In this case, the court did not want to deal with financiers. They wanted people to come. They wanted you to show proof of collateral. They wanted you to show proof you had money and that you were ready to settle on this transaction right away. So there were two other parties, both with intentions to develop the property, which were actually awarded the contract before the conservation fund. So there was definitely times when Bill and I called one another and we were really low on this deal. It was very uncertain if this was going to happen, and twice we really thought it was dead. So I'll let Bill comment from his perspective on that experience.
Yeah, this project, I can't emphasize enough how challenging it was for a variety of reasons. You know, trying to navigate this really uncertain, weird federal bankruptcy process. The fact that we were trying to do this all smack dab in the middle of COVID. And there were ups and downs more than I can count. And sometimes I do step back and I am still a little bit amazed that we actually pulled it off. But like I said, I think the team aspect and the partnership that Kristin and I and the whole kind of team on both sides created allowed us to navigate these challenges. We had the ability to get the information that we needed to learn about the issue, navigate it as best we can. And there were many leaps of faith. but you know, really it was instrumental in having somebody to kind of keep pushing. You know, when one of us was down, the other one could. Chris always send me pictures of her kids at critical times, and I always tell her that, you know, she doesn't know how much that really actually helped.
And speaking of that, I think that's, oh wait, well, one more step before we get to the good pictures. So then there was the political process. So when we thought we had this contract, the funding came from the state of Maryland from what's called Program Open Space. So when you buy and sell real estate, there is a transfer tax, and a very small portion of that goes to a pot of money called Program Open Space. And that is the largest source of our parkland acquisition funding in Maryland. But when you want to vie for some of this funding, there is an application process that is all goes to the Maryland Board of Public Works, which is a very unique body we have that's presided over by the governor, the treasurer, and the comptroller. And when we're talking about a huge amount of money here, it was $4.6 million. There is a lot of scrutiny for those sorts of expenditures. And also, this was right during the time when there was tremendous worry about the state budget, because revenues were really uncertain given the impact of COVID on the economy and all those other expenditures related to that. So that was very uncertain if this money would be deemed appropriate to release for this sort of thing at that time, because budget deficits were really looming and there was a lot of concern. So that was a huge hurdle to get through that. And thankfully, there were a lot of local advocates, some elected officials and others in Annapolis that really showed the value of this property and how it was great value for money for taxpayers and why this was the right time for it. So we're really pleased that there were no questions when it came to that point of the political process, but that was an important hurdle to overcome. And now we'll get to the cute kid pictures. So this is my son right around this time. So we thought we did it, we got through. So what happened was that the Conservation Fund was awarded this contract and we were able to settle for the property in 2020. So this was about 2 years after this process began. So it was 2 years from learning that the property was in bankruptcy to the contract being awarded. But that wasn't really the goal for the Conservation Fund to own it. The goal was for this to be part of the state forest. So we were excited momentarily, but then there was a few more rings of fire to jump through. So then we discovered this on the property. This was an enormous tire dump. On a 905-acre forested property, it's very hard to walk every inch of the property. It had been really not managed for many years, and so it was uncertain what sort of trespassers were on there, who was dumping on it. We've tried to find a few things, but not a tire dump of over 600 tires. Disposal requirements are really tricky for tires, and you have to do it safely. So we collectively figured out how to find the money, and it cost about $50,000 when all was said and done to clean up not just these tires, but this huge pile of tires that was pulled out one by one from a ravine right next to Gray's Run. There were also cars, there was a boat, there was other paraphernalia that had been dumped there over time. And so as Bill said, I think he really hit his low point when we thought we were out of the woods, and literally out of the woods, and we found these things that needed to be cleaned up. And this was really important. It was a stipulation for Maryland Department of Natural Resources when they took over the property that it was in a clean state. So Bill, any thoughts on this?
This was clearly one where, yeah, the tires almost broke me. And this was one where, you know, Kristin was able to leverage up with her partnership with the Aberdeen Proving Ground to help us, put us in a position to be able to navigate this last minute issue. I mean, when we first discovered it, I remember the call. And, but, you know, with Kristin's relationship with Aberdeen, they were great in helping, you know, step up to do what we needed to do to get the tires, you know, get the tires cleaned up.
Absolutely. And then there was one more big wrench thrown in. So these are encroachments. So when a property this large is really left to sit over time, it's very common that neighbors on the edges of it might not really be clear where the boundary lines are. And so in this case, we had everything from a few people placing a shed or sort of a garage on the property. And also in one case, someone had put their asphalt driveway actually on the wrong property. And so this was quite difficult to clean up. It started with probably the most expensive survey that I've ever heard of, a boundary survey that is to mark all the lines, to make a plat, which is a map, and also mark it on the ground, and to identify all these encroachments. And then it was a process of rectifying all of them. And so in some cases, those neighbors actually had to move the encroachment. And in some cases, we went ahead and went through the legal process to move certain boundary lines. And we were really up against a deadline here. We had this money approved from Maryland, from the Board of Public Works, and we wanted to get this property in state hands. And so we were moving as quickly as possible to deal with these cleanup issues, both on the ground and then these encroachments. And I just have to say on a personal note, I had a baby in the middle of this, which was quite complicated. When we started this, she was just a little peanut inside of me. And by the end of it, she looked like this. So this took long enough for me to grow and have a human during the middle of it, which occupied a lot of my time. So she was literally born out of both the highs and lows of the Stony Forest transaction, which will always be special to me. And then lastly, we have COVID. I can't overstate how difficult this was to do during the middle of this. I think everybody knows on a personal and professional level how much stress the uncertainty of the pandemic caused. And there were a few people that were involved in this who were ill during this time, which of course added a very personal element to this transaction. Thankfully, everyone is well. This was particularly challenging to go from an environment where the partnerships and relationships were so critical to then doing everything by phone and by email. So this feels a little bit like two COVID babies for me. I had my daughter shortly before, and then we had this transaction in the middle. But that all led us back to feeling like Superman again. But I'll just conclude this bit about the transaction by saying, how did we do it? And we'll sum it up in three things. So the first is partnerships. You've heard Bill and I say that. We're sort of beating that to death here, but it was absolutely the key to getting this done. And any large transactions like this in Harford County, partnerships are what's going to make it happen. The second is program open space. That's that source of funding I mentioned from the state of Maryland. And we are so lucky in Maryland that we have this funding source to help us purchase and maintain parkland. And then lastly is persistence. So my Candyland analogy here really was true. There was a lot of setbacks, a lot of overtaking one other developer coming in and then overtaking another one. And then finally we got to the end. So I'm going to keep with this theme of partnerships, funding, and persistence for all of our transactions going forward because it seemed to do the job here. But I'll conclude my remarks there. Bill, do you want to say anything before we turn it over to Dave?
Nothing, just reiterating what I had said before. This was actually the most challenging project I worked on. I think my attorney of 25 years who's just retired, she would agree. And it never would have happened without Kristin's partnership and support, and her three subheadings here kind of nail it. The whole COVID thing, that just added this just weird dynamic to the whole process, to be honest with you. You know, trying to get legal documents relative to an encroachment signed while you're standing in the driveway with masks on makes relationship building a little bit challenging. But, you know, I think Kristin and I both have great stories to tell about this one. I know I do. So
a lot of battle scars, a lot of
battle scars. We've been through the battle on this one. So
yeah.
Thanks to everybody involved.
Yeah, and I think in just concluding, what is so unique about land conservation work is that oftentimes it really is a battle to get these properties preserved. But what's so special about it is that when people go there in the future, they never have to know that. All they'll ever see is this beautiful forest that is going to be forever preserved. And that's both the blessing and the curse of the work that we do here. We don't want people to go there and think about how hard this was. We just want them to enjoy themselves and really immerse themselves. But on the flip side, it is important to recognize that these transactions are complex, they're long, they're costly, and they're very, very uncertain. And so everyone's support that's here today and listening, we sincerely appreciate it. And we are looking forward to more big transactions like this. So we'll now turn it over. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to have Dave Webb join, and he's going to talk a bit about what is on the property. So when you do go there, now that it's part of the Forest Service, what are you going to find? So hi, Dave. Want to go ahead and share your screen?
Sure, good morning. And point is that. Just trying to highlight everything I'll need.
Great. Yeah, and Dave, we've got about 10 minutes and then we'll turn it over to Rob after you. So while Dave's getting started, we'll just say that Dave, as I said, is going to talk about what you'll find on the property, and then Rob is going to tell you about the management of it and what's next.
Okay, do you see the screen?
I do.
All right, so I'll start it. First of all, let me say that I normally don't have moths drinking tears out of the corners of my eye. That was a one-time occurrence. It was pretty cool. I took a photo of it, and it's just proof that, man, when you put stuff up on the internet, you never know when it might come back to visit you. All right, so as Kristin introduced me, I'm a contributing editor with the Maryland Biodiversity Project. We're a 501c3 as well. It's really an online community of naturalists who are dedicated to documenting and conserving the flora and fauna in Maryland. And one of the basic questions of the organization is that we try to answer is, what do we have and where do we have it? So for Stony, I'm going to start off today with the birds here. So ornithologists tend to categorize birds in many ways, and the easiest way is really by seasonality. So we can talk about breeders, winter residents, and transients. Breeders, of course, are those that nest on site, and Stony Creswell, which is what I'm going to refer to the property as. I estimate there's probably 60 to 65 bird species that nest there. But the ones I want to kind of focus on today are the forest interior dwellers. And they are birds that require large contiguous tracts of forest, Stony certainly being a great example of that. And the reason they need these large tracts is it helps lower their risk of nest parasitism, predation, and fewer or less competition from invasive species. So Maryland's Aphids, or these forest interior dwellers, they're actually defined by Department of Natural Resources. And the list for the whole state is used by managers sometimes to consider Aphids when making zoning decisions. So I'm really just going to drill next on the 20 forest interior dwellers that are at Stony. So we have a pair of predators, pair of woodpeckers, and then about 13 or so songbirds. And there's 4 others that I kind of put as, perhaps they are here. These 4 either have very specialized habitat needs, or they're simply a bird that is no longer very common in Harford County. So let's take a look at this guy, and that was already in Kristin's video. You're probably familiar with this as a barred owl, and maybe you're familiar with its Who Cooks For You All call that it gives, but maybe if you are near a pair, you might hear this. That's what we refer to as the monkey calls. It's really kind of a dialogue back and forth between a pair of barred owls. Really cool to hear in the wild. Next, I've been birding in Harford County for 33 years now, and there is one species of bird that I never tire of. And no, it's not bald eagle, it's pileated woodpecker. To me, these birds are just so majestic. They really are the kings of the forest. Wood thrush is a type of songbird that breeds in this area. It was Henry David Thoreau's favorite bird. And unfortunately, the wood thrush is in rather serious decline on the East Coast. Since records from the breeding bird surveys conducted by USGS in the 1960s, we've seen a 64% drop in wood thrush populations. Another bird that we would expect at Stony is Scarlet Tanager. And how much more beautiful, vivid color can you get on a songbird? Unfortunately, these birds are also in decline. There's a 32% drop in their numbers. But the news is not all bad. Red-eyed vireo is an example of a species that seems to be holding fairly steady. So what's really interesting about red-eyed vireos is they're canopy dwellers. So they're up in the treetops, and we often hear them more than we do see them. The males are just incessant songsters on their territory, even on the hottest of days. They just sing and sing and sing. So if you go back to 1952, there was a very dedicated Canadian who listened for 14 hours one day to the songs of a single male red-eyed vireo. And this bird sang over and over and over for 10 of the 14 hours, 22,197 times. And when I first read about this story several years ago, I thought it must have been some poor graduate student, but no, it was actually a retired nurse and very dedicated amateur naturalist. And next we have a couple of our warbler species, the rather colorful, flamboyant male American redstart. And below that is, relatively speaking, a drab warbler, the Louisiana water thrush, that has very specialized habitat requirements. These are ground nesters, always found near the edge of clear, running perennial streams in mature forests, just like we have at Stony. So these water thrush are very good ecological barometers of water quality. A few other birds that birders get excited to see at any time that I know have been encountered at Stony just within the last year. About a year ago, I found tracks of wild turkey on one of the old logging roads. And then I think it was my next visit in the fall, I heard a common raven flying over the property. And ravens are really neat in that they were never, ever considered common in Harford County. They still aren't, but we do know that as of 2017, they are now a breeding species in the county. And very recently, within the last couple of weeks, someone reported a flock of rusty blackbirds. And of all the North American songbirds, this is probably one of the worst as far as decline in numbers. Since those surveys began 54 years ago, their population in North America has dropped by 77%. So let's remain high on the food chain and look at some of the mammals on the parcel. You have white-tailed deer, red fox, common raccoon, everybody's familiar with them. Bats are also quite common on the property, we assume. And here's a photo taken by a local young photographer, a real good guy, Matt Addix, of an eastern red bat. And I put up a photo here of a flying squirrel. A lot of people don't even realize just how common flying squirrels are, and that's because they're nocturnal, whereas our gray squirrels are diurnal creatures. So they're much more prevalent than you would suspect. And then there's a few mammals that, in talking with people, we think that they could be on the property, perhaps in much smaller numbers, of course, and that would include coyote, skunk, and, believe it or not, mink. They are sometimes found in very clear waters, and in a large undisturbed property, it wouldn't be a great surprise if somebody found mink along Ray's Run. So next, what I want to do over a few more slides is exhibit the diversity of insects and other small wildlife, usually arthropods, that are associated with the dominant trees at Stony. And so some of these insects, they solely depend upon that host species of tree for their own existence. So American beech is a very widespread tree found on the parcel. And if you ever see in the summertime or early fall a limb that appears to be covered with snow, it is not snow, it is rather an aphid. And it's a whole colony of aphids here, and they're covered with white waxy filaments that they use to help protect themselves from predators and to reduce the risk of desiccation when it gets dry. But what's really neat about these guys is when you get close to them and they detect you, they go from being perfectly still to doing this. Go full screen. And we sometimes call this beach blight aphid the boogie woogie aphid for its dancing motion. insects that twerk. Who would have thought? All right, so Kristin, just let me know if I get back to the presentation. I think we're good.
Yep, it looks like you're back.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, the aphids feed on sap from the beech trees, and they excrete a liquid that is some protein, a little bit of lipid, but it's mostly sugar. And so that sugar, when it accumulates either on the limb or maybe down at ground level below the limb, it is the perfect substrate for a type of fungus called Scoria spongiosa. And it's really fascinating to see how these three species from totally different parts of the plant and animal kingdom are dependent upon each other. Then we'll move to white oak, which is probably the most common of the oak species at Stony. And up top right, we have a type of longhorn beetle called the white oak borer. And the adults feed on flower nectar, but the larvae live under the bark of the tree and they feed on the vascular tissue. On the bottom left, we have this freakish looking creature that is actually a caterpillar of the monkey slug moth. Love the name. And these tentacles, they have nothing to do with movement. They're not legs. They're just covered with tiny hairs that if you touch them and get them stuck on you, they're urticating hairs or stinging hairs, and you will have a little bit of reaction to them. The monkey slug, fortunately, their reaction is not too bad, but there are other stinging caterpillars that if you touch them, you could have quite a serious reaction. So rule of thumb I tell people is unless you absolutely know what that caterpillar is, if it's a hairy one, don't touch it. And trust me, years ago, I accidentally squeezed several hairy caterpillars in my hand. And it took me about 4 days to recover from the allergic reaction. And in the bottom right, we have these raised brown lumps that appear to be cracked, and they're actually galls. A gall in general is just an abnormal outgrowth of plant tissue, kind of like what we would have as warts or a benign tumor. And they're a reaction to a larva that starts to feed on that plant, in this case, the leaf of the oak tree. And the plant itself forms the gall around that little caterpillar or the larva. So there's no harm to the plant. In this particular case, I was able to open up the larva, and there is the tiny little orange larva that feeds inside. And this Pileated Pileated is the name of it, I believe. It's a type of midge in the fly family. Next, red maple. It also has its own midge that forms galls, and it's called the oscillate gall, because these galls, instead of being raised, they're very flat, and they have these colorful kind of bullseye patterns that look like an eyeball, hence the word oscillate. Two moths that depend upon red maple also have maple, of course, in their name. The Rosy maple moth, one of our more colorful moths, beautiful pink and yellow, and it feeds on the leaves when it's in its larval stage. And another one, the maple callus borer moth. It's a clear wing, and if it looks as though the wings, you could see through it, that is absolutely right, you can. The larvae of this moth feed kind of like that white oak borer does. It feeds on the cambium under the bark surface. So now we'll look at sweetgum. And I think most people are familiar with Luna moth, and the principal host for Luna moth caterpillars are sweetgum trees. But there are a couple of other much smaller insects that totally rely upon sweetgum. There's only a few records that I'm aware of them being found on other types of trees. One is this leafhopper, Scyphytopius rubellus, and another one is sweetgum scale. A lot of people aren't even aware of scale, and I've only seen them myself a few times, but if you are a forester or a nursery owner, or a very avid gardener, you're probably familiar with the damage that scale can do. And this particular one feeds on sweetgum. And I think the final tree that I was going to talk to you about that dominates the landscape at Stony is the Tulip Poplar. It has a type of beetle, very, very colorful, called the red-legged Euprestis. It is a type of beetle whose family includes the emerald ash borer. And we all know the kind of damage that those beetles are causing to our ash populations. There's a difference though between the emerald ash borer and this red-legged Euprestis. The Euprestis is really not a problem for tulip poplars. And the reason for it is this is a native species, whereas the emerald ash borer is a non-native. And so over millennia, other life forms have learned to take advantage of these Euprestis for their food. For example, woodpeckers eat the larva, and there's actually a type of wasp that parasitizes them. So that's why you are very concerned over non-invasive species being introduced here in any part of our country. And then we have very favorite type of butterfly of most gardeners, the tiger swallowtail, that you're going to see down in your flower gardens, but in their larval stage, they're up in the tops of tulip poplars feeding on the foliage. And then one of my favorite photos that I've ever taken over the years is of this little tiny aphid that I found on a tulip tree we had just removed in my backyard. And this is a female tulip tree aphid. And if you look carefully, underneath are her young. This particular aphid, in fact, I'll say all aphids, they're rare in the insect world in that they are viviparous, meaning they give birth to their young live. And if we look real carefully here, you can see these dark dots on the side of the abdomen of the mom. They are more young aphids that are yet to be born. So really cool to see something that even in the insect world is quite a rare thing to witness. Now, I also want to just mention a few of the non-woody plants on the property and the insects associated with them. There's several grape species that you would find, and unfortunately, they will probably be attacked this year by spotted lanternfly. I really think this is the year that Harford County is going to see a big westward sweeping of the lanternflies that started out in Cecil County, just really crossed the river in the last year or two. There is good news, though. There is a soil-borne native fungus called Bovaria Basiana that gets on these lanternflies. It penetrates their exoskeleton, and when I say it, I mean the spores. And then those spores grow internally, and they take over the lanternfly. It's a nasty way to die, but the spores continue to grow until it kills the lanternfly. And then the spores, they really have no other place to go other than weak places on the lanternfly's body. So that would be the joints of the legs, the base of the wing. And that's what this white cottony stuff is that you see in the top right photo. So Cornell's really busy trying to figure out what are the best ways to come up with a safe and effective direct application insecticide using these pathogenic fungi to help control spotted lanternfly. You would never think that a brown moth with a little bit of pink and white and black in it could be so cool looking, but this is one of my favorites. And this moth, as a caterpillar, feeds on the foliage of ferns, including New York fern, which would be common at Stony. And even your ubiquitous eastern poison ivy has a type of insect. It is a moth caterpillar that feeds inside the leaves. So what it does is it mines the leaves, bores in between the layers of leaf tissue, and it feeds on the liquid, sometimes the solid tissue as well. And it carves out either a straight tunnel or, in this case, a blotch. So that's that white area that you see at the very top and the very bottom. And this particular one is a very tiny moth, only about a 7-millimeter wingspan, Cameraria guttifinitella. All right, let's move over to some of the reptiles and amphibians. So we have certainly some snakes. My favorite is ringneck snake, little tiny guy down the bottom right. They're only about the thickness of a pencil and maybe a foot long. So they like to feed on, let's see, earthworms and slugs and tadpoles, tiny frogs, a few insects. But most of the time they're hiding. And that is because as a small snake, they are prey for larger snakes. So they could be victim to this rat snake, which is the one that is really excellent at climbing trees. And water snake is an aquatic that you would find probably at Stony. Turtles, by far, eastern box turtle is going to be the most dominant species, and it's going to really prosper there because you don't have any roads running through the 900 contiguous acres where they might meet their a bad fate under the tire of a car. In some of the standing waters, it's possible that we could attract snapping turtle and painted turtle there. And as far as lizards go, the common 5-line skink, such as this blue-tailed juvenile, would be the dominant species of lizard. Salamander-wise, we have redback salamander. They're the most common, and I often find them under stones or rotting logs. And then in even more moist areas, say near springs or streams, you could find the larger red salamander or dusky salamander. In the world of frogs and toads, American toad will dominate. I don't even know if Fowler's toad would show up there. Green frog, I have seen hundreds of their tadpoles in the some of the ruts on the old logging roads. And then the arboreal species, spring peeper, already calling now, and gray tree frog, cool little frog. Look for that orange spot on the inside of the hind legs to make your ID. There is so much more here at Stony. I had 10 minutes or so to try to talk about 2,000 species. I really didn't think I'd get through them all. But if fish are your thing, you know, fungi, isopods, lichens, spiders, wildflowers, go out there, have fun, explore, take your friends, your family, take your camera and document what you find. And when you do, you can submit your observations to an app called iNaturalist. If you're not familiar with it already, it's a great site for helping people with your identification and also simply to catalog what you have found on the property. So with that, I think my time is up. Kristin?
Thank you so much, Dave. That was a lot of information and a lot of exciting things. I hope now everyone is getting enthused about going out to the property. So I'll turn it over to Rob Felt from the Forest Service, who will talk to you about how you can visit and what's coming next for the Forest Service on the property. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome.
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me today. And thank you to Kristin and Bill for all the work that you guys put into making the transfer happen. The Maryland DNR was very pleased to receive the tract and add it to the old portion of Stony Forest. I just want to talk a little bit today about what's been going on since we took over about a year ago.
You want to hit presentation mode quickly, Rob, on your slides?
Sure.
Bottom.
I'm sorry. Okay, there we go. Let me just change things around here real quick. Okay.
Oh, no,
so,
that's not it.
oh, really?
Nope. In the, you get out of that in the lower right hand, right near the Zoom bar, you see the presentation.
I apologize. Let me start over here.
It's all right.
Okay, it wasn't doing this to me the other day.
It's okay. Even how you first had it'll work if it's not coming up correctly.
Okay. All right, let's go with screen 2.
Yeah, that'll work that way if that's how it's showing, Rob.
Okay. I'm sorry.
It's all right. You're good.
Okay. Anyway, Stony Demonstration Forest. So it's a demonstration forest. It's different from a state forest. It's different from your traditional state forest. It's different from a state park in that its primary mission is education and training. So a few years ago, we had some loggers out to the old tract and loggers that work in this part of the state and went over what we call BMPs or best management practices for logging and how they can keep water clean while they're operating. We discussed the regulations stuff. We've had our own staff out to do training and we have been looking at installing some examples of crossings, stream crossings, how to cross the the streams with equipment without getting into the stream and doing that well. So it's a little bit different from your average state forest. Otherwise, recreation is a secondary use and habitat management. So you should be seeing right now an example of the boundary line. The state boundary is always painted in yellow.
Rob, I think you just need to click on slide 2 there.
Oh, I apologize. Okay.
See on the sidebar, if you just
I have
click
3 screens going on here, so. Okay, hang on a second. All right, we're just gonna do this. Okay, so.
Yep, that's perfect. We got it there.
Okay, all right. So the state uses yellow paint to mark the boundary. So if you're facing state property, you've got a wide band here on the tree. And if you're on state property and looking towards private land, you would have this dot. So if you ever go out to the tract, it should be freshly painted. And this can help you, determine where you are on the property. Make sure that you don't trespass onto our neighbor's property. So here's a little map of where the Grays Run Tract is in relation to the old tract. There is a parking lot at the James Run Tract that is closed about half the time. It is open for hunting season, and we're hoping to have hunting on the Grays Run Tract up and running this fall. Our staff have been out to map many of the trails that are there and doing some evaluation on how those trails are, if they need any work, if they need to be remediated, if any of them need to be closed down because they're just too much work, or there's a different route. And you can also see where the Maryland paving property is, and they've been a really great neighbor. They've helped us with some of the cleanup and are usually really they communicate well with us, and we've had a good relationship with them, and look forward to that going forward. So last year we had a trash pickup that Harford Land Trust facilitated, and we picked up about 2,500 pounds of garbage, and that doesn't include the recycling. A whole truck full of recycling that went as well. So there was a lot of trash that got picked up. And we're really thankful for any of the folks that are on this that showed up that day. We're hoping to do that again in a few weeks on Earth Day and do another cleanup that weekend. We are also in the process of getting signs printed to mark the safety zones for the hunting. It'll be a really large tract. Folks are really excited about hunting there. I've spoke to a man who had hunted there as a kid and was looking forward to doing it again. So we'll be getting that set up and in place soon. So the forest composition, Dave touched on some of that. The dominant tree types are yellow poplar, American beech, sweetgum, red maple, and black cherry. There's some good white oak in there too. Future management is going to focus more on generating oak and as a valuable timber species, and also really valuable for habitat and as a mast producing source for wildlife. Understory trees have been musclewood, dogwood, Hercules club, viburnum, and a lot others. A lot of really good biodiversity there. And so we have the regeneration potential, hoping to bolster the white oak and the black oak and the cherry, and get some hickory in there as well. And the potential, it's sort of like a mixed bag right now, but the growth potential is pretty well. It's good soil there, good potential for growth. It's been cut over pretty good over the last 10 years or so. By the previous owner. So here and there's either young forest, patches of young forest where a selection harvest was done, or there were some areas where it was just too steep, and so there's still some mature forest hanging there. Some beech areas, some areas of really good mature beech, and some white oak as well. So the goals would be to just make sure that there aren't any more hazards, and that it's safe for public access. There's really nowhere to park at the new track right now. There's a little strip at what we call Gate 1 at the far western end of the new track. Like I said, we're planning another trash pickup on April 23rd. That Hartford Land Trust is facilitating that. That's going to be huge, and hoping that'll continue. And we're just continuing planning and stabilization. So we have a parking area planned for the intersection near Tower Road, and a disabled hunter hunt from vehicle area off of Stepney Road. And I was actually out there this morning to let the survey crew in to take the elevations for that area. So we're looking forward to that, and I'm glad that's moving along. We're going to improve the entrances and make sure the gates are operable, and do some further work with the trails. Some of them are really in bad shape, and so we'll be looking to stabilize those. Some of those will be vehicle, and some of those will be foot traffic only. And we have a sign order in process, so no dumping, no parking, those kinds of signs that we need everywhere. I'm surprised at how many signs there are, and you think it was just a forest, and but no, you need signs. Let's see. Deer management. We took this photo years ago in an area that was fenced, and you can see where the one ownership changes, and the deer are not able to get through that fence to eat the vegetation on the other side. So managing deer is really important. It's really important for regenerating the forest and keeping those populations in control. And so hunting is a really great tool for us to help keep those populations under control. It's 906 acres. Like I said, there's a mixed bag of things that have happened there in the past. And so my crew needs to get in there and really do some surveys and see what kind of regeneration potential there is and what's growing there right now, as opposed to the older plan that we have. So there probably won't be much harvesting going on there for a little while, but over the years, you will see that. And just identify any other threats like invasive plants. I know that we have wavy leaf basket grass out there, which we'll be looking to control pretty quickly. And most importantly, we have a forest management plan in the works. The old tract, its plan is due to expire, so we'll be looking at redoing that one and incorporating this new tract into the forest management plan, and just evaluate all of the stands across the entire forest for their composition. So and I was able to snap some photos out there, and Grace Run there on the right. Really neat place. I'm really happy to be working with it, and for all the help that we've gotten getting this in place. And I'm just really thrilled. So thanks for having me today, and sorry for the PowerPoint snafu here.
No worries, Rob. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great to have Rob as our management partner. As you did know, we're doing a cleanup on April 23rd. You can find that on our website to go ahead and register for that. And that is really important because we like to say our work just begins after we've done a transaction, because of course we need to manage the property. I know that we've gone past the hour. We had so much great information. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat right now. I think I answered one that came in. If you do have to leave, you can also feel free to contact us at the Harford Land Trust. Our number and email is on our website. And if it's anything specifically for Dave or Bill or Rob, I can make sure that they get that information as well. So I hope that everyone is very excited about this. I don't see any other questions coming in. I'll give everyone 10 more seconds and then we'll conclude. Wow, nothing coming in. Okay, well, hopefully everyone learned all that they wanted to know today and more. And so again, thank you very, very much for joining us. I want to thank again our presenters, Bill Crouch from the Conservation Fund, Dave Webb, and Rob Felt with the Maryland Forest Service. This has been a wonderful lunch and learn with Harford Land Trust. We hope to have many more, and we would really appreciate your feedback, so please do contact us. Oh, wait, one question someone said. Oh, total cost of all of the surveys. Whew, that was a lot. It was pretty close to about $100,000 for the survey, which I guess
23 versions.
Yep. Can you set up credits for landscape architects? Ooh. I'm not sure about the answer to that. So if Grace, if you want to email us, we can get you any of that information. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and conclude. Thank you everyone so much. And please do contact us with any more questions. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kristin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin.